I received a question from a student in Indonesia, and she wrote, I watched your video, what is the 14th Amendment Due Process Clause? And I have a question. Is the George Floyd case a violation of the Due Process Clause? Because when he was arrested and died, he did not get his right to a fair trial in front of the jury. Thank you for the question, and thank you to everyone else from Indonesia who's recently sent me questions. It's good to hear from you. Now, because of the seriousness of this case, I'm not going to answer it with a typical animations that I would use. Instead, I'm going to focus on the civil lawsuit brought by the family of George Floyd following his death, and this is their civil claim against the defendants who are responsible for his death and who are alleged to have violated Mr. Floyd's constitutional rights. Now, the question from the student was Mr. Floyd's due process rights violated? And the short answer to the student's question is actually the family of Mr. Floyd is relying on the Fourth Amendment, not the 14th Amendment, primarily in its claims against these defendants. So what I'm going to do is scroll down to the very first count in this complaint. A count is a cause of action, the claim brought by the plaintiff against the defendants. So here's count one. This is the very first claim. And everything that preceded this was largely the factual background alleged by the plaintiff concerning the circumstances that led to Mr. Floyd's death. And what you'll notice here is that the plaintiff is relying on 42 USC Section 1983 and Fourth Amendment violations. So I'm going to start just by looking briefly at the Fourth Amendment. These are the first 5 amendments to the United States Constitution, and here's Amendment 4, and the amendment protects people in the United States from unreasonable searches and seizures, unreasonable searches and unreasonable seizures. Here, the seizure can refer to a person who is being seized, who's being held by the police. And so in the United States, when police officers are alleged to have used excessive force in the course of arresting someone, these types of claims are brought under the Fourth Amendment. That's why in the civil action that we just looked at, the family of Mr. Floyd is primarily relying on Amendment 4, which prohibits excessive force by police officers. So as a result of Supreme Court decisions, excessive force claims are actually analyzed under Amendment 4 and not under the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. Now, if you recall, the complaint also referred to something called 42 USC 1983. USC stands for United States Code, so these are federal statutes. Federal statutes are organized in volumes called titles. 42 is the number of the title, and this is Section 1983. Let me bring that up real quickly here. 42 USC 1983 provides for a civil action for deprivation of rights. What 42 USC 1983 establishes is that if somebody acting on behalf of a state in the United States or in the District of Columbia, so in Washington, D.C., so a person who's acting on behalf of the state who violates a person's rights, privileges, or immunities secured by the Constitution, that is, if you have a right that is protected under the United States Constitution, and a person from a state, one of the states in the United States, violates those rights, well, the federal courts of the United States can hear your claim against those persons based on that violation of rights. So what happened with Mr. Floyd's case is, following his death, his family has sued these persons, these are police officers who are working for the state of Minnesota, and they're bringing a civil rights claim against those persons. And the nature of the civil rights violation is primarily a violation of the Fourth Amendment because they're alleging that these individuals used excessive force that resulted in the death of Mr. Floyd. So it's a great question. If the circumstances were different and there were other violations of rights, then in fact the claims could be based on due process violations. But because Mr. Floyd's case is premised upon the police officers using excessive force, that's why in this case it's being presented as a Fourth Amendment violation. So thanks very much for your question, and don't hesitate to contact me again. Bye now.